I'm Pat Doris. Welcome to The Story. Hey, did you feel history being made 2 days ago? It really was. Just a bit to the north of us in Moses Lake, Washington, the first fixed-wing, all-electric commuter airplane made a short test flight. We've heard all about electric cars and trucks, but researchers working on zero-emission propulsion have gone far beyond vehicles. They've gone into the sky, and that definitely makes electric planes our big story tonight. The company that built the plane is called Eviation. They named their airplane Alice after Alice in Wonderland. Tuesday morning around 7 a.m., they rolled it out at the hangar in Moses Lake, Washington, and took off for its first test flight. The plane flew up to an altitude of 3,500 feet and stayed airborne for about 8 minutes. The company said the flight gave engineers invaluable data as they continue to optimize the aircraft for commercial production. The company's CEO said the groundbreaking milestone will lead innovation in sustainable air travel and shape both passenger and cargo travel in the future. And check it out, the plane produces no carbon emissions, significantly reduces noise according to the company, and operates at a fraction of the cost of light jets or high-end turboprops. There are a few other companies racing to build commuter electric planes as well, but Eviation appears to be in the lead. It could be a real glimpse of the future. Those of you who live on flight approaches around PDX, for example, one day imagine losing the roar of the jets overhead. And what if cargo planes and passenger planes all ran on batteries instead of jet fuel? It's so cool, I want to give you a deeper look at this. The plane also caught the attention of NBC's aviation reporter, Tom Costello. Here's his report on it from last spring.
In an aircraft hangar near Seattle, what may be the future of aviation, a battery-powered plane nicknamed Alice. Its propellers mounted on the back near the tail, and one massive 8,000-pound battery.
So the battery actually, it starts from here, stretches all the way back to here.
Made by the Israeli company Eviation, the plane is designed to carry just 9 passengers on shorter hops. Think Portland to Seattle or Boston to Martha's Vineyard, at about the same speed as a prop plane, 400 miles in 2 hours. Roughly double the flight time of a 737, but quieter and smoother with nearly zero emissions. Company president Greg Davis. It looks like a flying Tesla behind you.
We're really excited about this aircraft. Eventually, we believe that the electric aircraft is going to achieve dominance in this sector, and we're prepared to support that.
But first, it needs FAA approval. Former Navy and United Airlines pilot Steve Crane is Eviation's lead test pilot.
It's like a Tesla. You step on the gas in the Tesla and you go. So in that way, it's very different.
If all goes well, the planes could be in service within 2 years. Already, DHL Cargo is ordering at least a dozen, while New England's Cape Air is placing a very big order, 75 planes. Eviation promises a first-class interior, a smaller plane but wide with big windows.
The most impressive thing about Alice is that it's going to be the most modern aircraft for the 21st century and beyond. Not only by design, but also the technology.
But the competition is stiff among battery-powered aircraft designers. Wright Electric is developing a 100-passenger battery plane. Sweden's Heart Aerospace, backed by United Airlines. Airbus and Boeing are also working on designs. The biggest challenge, those massive batteries, too heavy to fly transatlantic or even across the country. Alice will need a 30-minute charge before each 2-hour flight, but eventually. This is a 9-seater plane. Do you envision someday this could grow to the size of a 737?
There's no limit to how far we're going to be able to take zero-emissions aviation.
Super interesting. Now to the biggest national story, Hurricane Ian. Today, President Biden said the system may be responsible for, quote, substantial loss of life and could end up being the deadliest storm in Florida history. NBC News reports at least 9 people have died so far, even though the state has refused to officially comment on fatalities. This morning, Ian was downgraded to a tropical storm after swirling over central Florida overnight. But tonight, it's increasing its power again back to hurricane-strength winds around 75 miles an hour. It's expected to make another landfall around South Carolina tomorrow. All of this hurricane stuff recently had us thinking, why is it that these systems don't fire up in the Pacific and affect us here in the Northwest? Although I'm glad they don't. Chief Meteorologist Matt Zaffino, as always, has all the answers. What do you think, Matt?
Thanks so much, Pat. So first of all, hurricanes absolutely do fire up in the Pacific. just not our part of the Pacific, and I'll show you why in just a second. All has to do with really ocean temperatures. Hurricanes are warm core storms. Unlike our strong winter storms, which can bring hurricane force winds, those are cold core storms. They derive their energy from the dynamics of the upper atmosphere and from differences in temperatures. But hurricanes are not that. They derive their energy from the warm, moist air over the ocean. So you need a very warm ocean in order to get a hurricane or a tropical storm to form. So that's the first ingredient. You need converging air that's moving upwards, which is pretty common in the tropics when we've got all that heat down low. And you need a lot of moisture, which is also very common in the tropics, of course, high humidity there. And then the winds aloft, you either want them blowing from the same direction or you want very little wind aloft too. So those are the major ingredients you need for hurricane formation. So let's investigate the first one, the ocean temperatures. Look at the colors here. We're in the blues to the greens to the yellows, all the way down to the middle of Baja. That's not very warm water. We're talking 50, 60 degree temperature water. That is not warm enough to, let alone form a hurricane, to sustain a hurricane, even if it does form farther south off the coast of Mexico where the water is warm enough, and that's where they form quite frequently. In fact, little known fact, we get more hurricanes forming in the eastern Pacific than we do in the Atlantic in a typical year. They just move out to sea. That's another reason why we don't see them here. Now, they do happen. Back in 1997, there was one named Ignacio that came up Baja, canceled a baseball game in San Francisco, and brought us rain in the Northwest. That's really the most direct impact we've ever had from a tropical storm. It was no longer a tropical storm when it got here. What about the Columbus Day storm? We got some video of that. In fact, the 60th anniversary coming up in about 2 weeks of the Columbus Day storm, October 12, 1962. It was not a tropical storm or a hurricane, although it did derive its energy. It formed from the remains of a typhoon in the western Pacific. But again, it was not a tropical system when it did the damage here. Okay, back to the maps, and I'm going to show you the ocean temperatures over on the East Coast. Look at all the red here. It's in the 80s. In fact, it even gets in the 90s sometimes in parts of the Gulf of Mexico. And this warm water extends all the way across the Atlantic to the coast of Africa. So there's just way more source area for tropical storms to not only form, but to maintain their energy and strengthen over the Atlantic and the Gulf of Mexico. Now, I'm going to show you another map here that shows hurricane climatology just for a particular week in August, late July and August actually, but it proves the point. If you look at the track, these are all the named storms, okay? Well, they all came from the east and moved west. So that's the general direction of the hurricanes. And here in the Northwest, that's not where our upper level winds are typically coming from. They are off the coast of Mexico. And in fact, that's the saving grace, Pat, because when those hurricanes do form off the coast of Mexico, they usually travel westward out over the open ocean and don't really bother anybody. We get them in the Pacific, just not our part of the Pacific.
Wow, super interesting as always. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. The Red Cross is already on the ground in Florida. If you'd like to donate to help their efforts, open the camera on your smartphone now and hover it over the QR code there on your screen. It will take you directly to their donation site. This will be a weeks-long or maybe months-long effort to clean up and recover, and we hope that you'll help out however you can. Now to a fight between hospitals and the Oregon Health Authority over the handling of civil commitment cases. We've talked a lot about civil commitment over the last month. That's when a person has a severe mental illness but denies treatment and they're forced to get it anyway. Well, Legacy Health, Providence Health, and Peace Health are now suing the OHA because the state hospital has all but stopped taking civil commitment cases. Reporter Evan Watson explains why hospital systems are frustrated that they're now picking up the slack.
3 Oregon hospital systems are suing the Oregon Health Authority, saying the state is forcing them to provide long-term mental health care when their hospitals just aren't built for that.
Our community hospitals that provide acute inpatient treatment for behavioral health are meant to stabilize individuals, and then once they're stabilized, move them to the next layer of care that they need. When we can't do that, those beds that are not accessible for people who are in an acute crisis.
Melissa Eckstein is president at Unity Center for Behavioral Health.
We're seeing a tremendous backup, meaning we're not able to get people into the services that they need. We're starting to see individuals staying longer in our emergency rooms when they're trying to access behavioral health services. We're seeing people not being able to get into outpatient services as easily as they were maybe a couple of years ago.
The Oregon State Hospital stopped admitting most civil commitment patients in 2019, even though about 500 people are committed in the state each year. As a result, the number of civil commitment patients at the state hospital has dropped from hundreds of people to about a dozen. OHA has followed federal court rulings to prioritize mental health patients who are facing criminal charges or considered guilty except for insanity. But hospital leaders say this practice violates the civil rights of commitment patients, leaving hundreds of people in community hospitals that aren't designed for long-term care.
We want to end the cycle of people not being able to get the care that they need in the moment that they need it, and to advocate for having a full continuum of care regardless of where people are in their crisis.
In a statement, the Oregon Health Authority said it's focused on the care of the hospital's patients and supporting them on their road to recovery as they search for a new path forward. OHA did not comment on the lawsuit. The suit claims the state has known for years about OHA's failure to provide, quote, appropriate and legally required treatment to civilly committed individuals, following a 2017 study that found limited acute care beds and emergency room backups. A civil commitment can last up to 6 months. The Providence, Legacy, and Peace Health hospital systems want a federal judge to rule that OHA's practices towards civil commitment patients are unconstitutional, and for the state to assume care of long-term civil commitment patients.
Evan joins me now, and the state hospital story is the gift that just keeps giving.
That's right.
So how many patients are in these local private hospitals?
Right, so we had Providence, Peace Health, and Legacy, and I asked them that. I said, so how much are you dealing with? What does this look like on an annual basis? They gave me an estimate of around 200 civil commitment patients that those three hospital systems are working with each year. And again, a civil commitment can last up to 6 months, 180 days. So those are beds that would be occupied for a long amount of time, potentially taking that away, which is their concern leading to this lawsuit that was filed recently.
And then just like with the aid and assist, I'll bet there's people that would like to get into those hospital beds, but there's no room because those people are there because they can't go to the state hospital and it just goes around and around.
Right, some longer wait times in those emergency department type situations sometimes, or people looking for other options, even outpatient or other counseling and other services like that can be delayed or affected by this, according to the hospitals.
Yeah, all right. Good stuff as always. Thank you, Evan. And speaking of the state hospital, yesterday we showed you how Marion County commissioners are worried those who are released early from the Oregon State Hospital could end up on Salem streets instead of the county where they came from. And it is a valid concern. But there are worries inside the hospital about another issue, staffing. There are more than 200 job openings there, and state lawmakers just authorized $1.7 million to fund another 20 full-time positions. During the pandemic, the National Guard was called in to help. And now, some liked it so much, they're deciding to stick around. Catherine Cook has the story.
Food services, may I come in?
Summer 2021. As COVID-19 peaked, Oregon Guard members stepped up to fill staffing shortages at hospitals around the state. That included the Oregon State Hospital in Salem. When they requested support, 32 Guard members provided, including Zenas Sigra.
I was nervous about working here, You kind of didn't know, I remember as a kid, the bars on the windows, mental hospital. But then after working here and working with some of the patients and talking to them, they're just regular people like us who do need help.
On his mission, Zenas worked in food services. But as the months passed, he saw other opportunities here, outside his service with the Guard.
Since I was like, I could do this. I could work here.
In June, 10 Guard members applied to work for the state hospital after their mission ended. Zenas was among them. He's now a mental health therapy technician. His days include escorting patients to their meals, therapy sessions, or just passing a little time with them.
We'll play cards. Dice is usually the number one thing that they like to play up there.
Right now, there are more than 200 job openings at the Oregon State Hospital, everything from medical to clerical. But staff members admit just getting people to apply can be challenging.
I think being injured is probably one of the main concerns people would have. And while that does happen, it doesn't happen all the time.
Angie Johnson is director of nursing at the Oregon State Hospital. She says not every job poses that type of risk, and training is a big part of prevention. She calls the need to staff up critical.
That's the goal here, to provide the best patient care we can. So if we are fully staffed, that relieves stress from from the job.
The windfall of Guard member applicants was unexpected, the product of a chance to test the waters. Johnson hopes others take their own chance at finding a good fit.
I think being able to help people when they're in crisis is one of the main things, because people come here when they're at their worst, and we're able to help them get through that and get to a space where they can lead a fulfilling life in the community.
In Salem, Catherine Cook, KGW News.
Coming up next on The Story, he spent nearly 30 years in prison for the murder of an Oregon state official, but his conviction was thrown out in 2019 and he was freed. Today, an appeals court took up the case of Frank Gable, his freedom on the line once again, how they ruled, and a look back at the case from the KGW vault when The Story returns. The long-running murder case in Oregon against Frank Gable appears to be coming close to an end. Today, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld the ruling that tossed out Gable's conviction. He walked out of prison in the summer of 2019 while his appeals are pending. In 1990, Gable was sentenced to life in prison without parole for killing the head of Oregon's Department of Corrections the year before. Michael Franke was stabbed to death on the grounds of the Oregon State Hospital in the early evening hours. Nobody saw the attack and the murder weapon was never found. The U.S. Court of Appeals agreed with a lower court ruling that no reasonable juror would have convicted Gable in light of new evidence. What was that evidence? It was that state investigators used widely discredited polygraph and interrogation techniques as a psychological club to get statements from others against Gable, and that the trial court was wrong to not allow evidence that another man had confessed multiple times to the murder and had shared details of the crime that were not publicly known. KGW interviewed Gable in 1990 before he was arrested for the murder. He happened to be in prison at the time for a different crime. Even then he said he did not kill Franke, but he had an idea of why people started to think that maybe he did.
I believe that I walked into a complicated drug ring and really don't know how complicated it was until now.
And you think maybe that drug ring had something to do with Franke's murder?
I believe so, yeah. I personally could never see myself taking a human life, because
Frank Gable has found himself a key figure in the Michael Franke murder investigation. He says he didn't do it. He is currently serving a year sentence in the Coos County Jail for assaulting his wife, but others say he's done much worse than beat his wife. Mike Kierans, a convict from the Idaho State Penitentiary, claims Frank Gable told him he killed Franke during a car burglary. Gable says that's a lie, that there's only one reason why other inmates keep pointing to him.
I believe it's because a lot of the people like Kearns and several other inmates are jumping on the bandwagon thinking, well, we can get our charges dropped, point the finger at Gable, we'll get our charges dropped, so my name keeps coming up. I've been so scared, each day you don't know if you're getting out in 52 days or if you're gonna get put to death penalty for a crime you didn't commit. So yeah, I'm scared, more scared than I've ever been in my life.
One of the people pushing to free Gable, the brother of the killed prisons director, Michael Franke. Kevin Franke in 2019 told us this case actually had two victims, his brother and Frank Gable, who spent nearly 30 years in prison. Still to come on The Story, remains found in Clark County back in 2002 stumped the medical examiner's office and went unidentified for 2 decades until now. We'll show you how advanced DNA technology helped crack the case and bring closure to loved ones after the break. Investigators in Clark County have solved a 20-year-old cold case using advanced DNA tracing technology. Christine Pinawanich spoke with the brother of the man who was found dead in Ridgefield back in 2002. And while he is relieved he finally knows what happened to his brother, he says it's been a tough road.
Swimming. I had already gone through the death last week, and then 2 years ago with my mom. Now my brother might be dead. It's been rough.
Robert Johnson says for 20 years he never heard from his brother, James Orrin Johnson.
And unfortunately, he'd gotten into some drugs and he was running with the wrong people again. I mean, deep in my heart, I knew he wasn't around anymore.
Even so, Johnson, who lives in Utah, says earlier this month he got a call he never expected from the Clark County Medical Examiner's office, saying due to DNA testing and forensic genealogy, it was possible that remains found in Ridgefield in 2002 in an apparent suicide belonged to his brother.
Now, forensic genealogy is this new wave of scientific technology that we can rely on to start to get some leads. So, and in this case, they gave us a lead, but it dated back to the 1850s, to the Brile sisters in Oregon.
From there, Nikki Costa, the operations manager at the medical examiner's office, says it was a long process of going through all the branches of the family tree. After getting DNA from a descendant of those sisters in the 1800s, the search narrowed just enough.
So James Sr. was our missing person, or our unidentified person. James Jr. had done a test, I believe it was with Ancestry.com, about 5 years ago.
Because only some DNA databases give people the option to release their data to law enforcement and medical examiners, Costa says the son, James Jr., uploaded his existing DNA data to GEDmatch, one of the databases that has that option.
And they connected in a parent-child relationship, as expected, right? So it helped triangulate.
For Costa, closing the cold case was a big moment.
This is the only part of my job I truly love, which is chasing down answers, trying to follow leads, doing whatever we can and whatever I can to further an investigation and get closure and an answer.
Johnson says he's grateful for all the work.
And I can't imagine what the rest of my life would be like if I had never known what happened to my kid brother.
In Clark County, Christine Pitawanich, KGW News.
By the way, our expert Nikki Costa mentioned there are only a couple of DNA testing and genealogy companies that allow people to opt into law enforcement database searches. She says people who use the GED match and family tree DNA databases can be a huge help to solving these cold cases. All right, keep sending your questions and comments to thestory@kgw.com. We'll wrap things up right after this. For our Hey Help, we're talking about Florida. We continue to watch it from afar after major Hurricane Ian left a brutal path of destruction across the Sunshine State. Nearly a quarter of the customers in the state lost power. Communities are going to need a lot of help to get back on their feet. If you'd like to help victims of the storm, consider donating